From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Why, thank you, Ollie. Thank you very much. It's Wednesday's programme, by the way. How you doing? You well? I'm Richie Allen. I've got an interesting show lined up for you this Wednesday. I'd love to hear from you, by the way. Tweet at Richie Allen Show now. And, tell me anything you bloody well want.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Yeah, enough of the casual swearing, eh? Enough of the casual swearing.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Dag nabbit. 19th century prospector swearing. Can't cern it. Welcome to the programme. Dr. Stuart Waiton from Abertay University in Dundee spoke to me a short time ago. I recorded him, so I did, and it is a fascinating conversation. Stuart has been writing in the Scottish Herald newspaper about transgender issues, and, well, it's caused him a little bit of bother. So we talked about that, but not just that. We also talked about something called restorative justice, which has been in the news this week because the Welsh rugby legend Gareth Thomas was the victim of homophobic abuse. He was abused and then assaulted by a 16-year-old boy. And Gareth, I think, with the best will in the world, has opted for restorative justice. What does that mean? Well, I talked to Stuart Waiton about that. I think you're going to be fascinated by it, and I'm looking forward to your comments on it when you're listening to it in a few minutes' time. Dr. Stuart Waiton on Wednesday's show, the 21st of November 2018. Fab Radio 2 in Manchester. Do check out fabradiointernational.com, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio, and richieallen.co.uk, my website as well. There you are, hey. Ta-da! All very dramatic. You well? Good Wednesday for you. What say you? Good? Yeah? Indifferent? Bad? You can tell me. I'll be happy to hear from you, as I said. I love that Interpol story. The former Kremlin guy didn't get the top Interpol job just in case it was used, Interpol, to chase down Putin's enemies. Right? Yeah. You might have an opinion on that. You can have an opinion on whatever you want. It's always good to talk to you. I say that every day, and I mean it. Love being here with you. Saw this in the Guardian newspapers this morning. Oh, so you're reading the Guardian, are you now, Richie? I read all the papers. I do. I read them all. I subscribe to the ones that I have to subscribe to, even though, a part of me regrets doing that. I prefer to go out and get the papers. When I started producing talk radio many years ago, I was producing another presenter. I was producing a man, a brilliant presenter he was, Billy McCarthy. And I would go to a shop on the Quay in Waterford City at the crack of dawn every morning, and there I would be presented with all of the papers, fresh off the presses, with the ink still smudgeable. And there was something, something nostalgic. There was something great about that, having the newspapers in your hand. These days, sadly, I don't. I read them online, and I don't like it. But anyway, I can't really do much about it. So in The Guardian today was this story. Look, there will be a little bit of Brexit talk in a minute, just a little bit. And then we'll talk about other things. Came across a story in The Guardian about going to Auschwitz. Now, this has come up quite a bit recently, about educating people about the Holocaust and educating them to the degree where they will then come back from Auschwitz and they will lead the fight against anti-Semitism. Can't cern it, dag nabbit. Because as we all know, dear listener, anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, you're never more than 2 meters away from it. It's like those wonderful marketing surveys that were done years ago. How far away are you from a can of Coca-Cola? Well, you're probably only 10 metres away. Well, anti-Semitism has it beat. You're only a stone's throw from anti-Semitism. It's everywhere. Jews are running for their lives in the UK. And because of that, we need to send people to Auschwitz to show them, look what happens when you don't stamp out anti-Semitism. That's what's going on. So I was interested to learn today that students have been going on field trips to Auschwitz. Government funded, by the way. This is funded by the government, right? People are starving. There are people homeless on the streets of this country. I'm not virtue signalling, by the way. I'm not. I swear I'm not virtue. Stop it. I'm not virtue signalling. I'm serious. There are people starving. The government now wants people who are living in extreme poverty to take in lodgers. This is how bad things are getting for people. You're making it up, Richie. I'm not. They're suggesting that the poorest people in the country who can barely pay for their council house take in a lodger. Take in a lodger to make ends meet. That's just lovely. But the government can't afford to look after its own people. It can't look after the army veterans returning back to the UK, completely fucked up mentally because of what they've done, what they've been made to do, what they've seen, and all the shit that's been sprayed on them and given to them in their food that they didn't know about. They can't look after veterans either, but we can find money to send our students to Auschwitz on day trips so that they can come back and stamp out anti-Semitism. The article in The Guardian is such crap, and it's pathos on every paragraph. Listen to this. I should have music. I'm going to get some music for this. This is genuine now. This is genuine. This was in The Guardian today, right? I know some of you are frantically looking at The Guardian. Where are we here? Have I got it here? I can't even find it. Yeah, some of you, I've got it here. Some of you now are frantically looking at The Guardian. Listen to this. This is genuine. You ready? I wish I had one of those cinematic voices in a world where nothing was legal. So here it is. This is a genuine piece in today's Guardian. We've got some backing music. We have a bit of backing music. For some, it was the railway tracks. For others, the piles of shoes or suitcases marked with their owners' names. Hecht, Metzner, Clara and Sarah Fochtman. A rusted tin of face cream reminded one visitor of his grandmother. The book of names, recording the barest details of millions murdered in the Holocaust, made another student weep. These were some of the images that 93 UK university students who this week visited the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau took home with them, along with a new understanding of the horrors of the Holocaust and a fresh commitment to countering anti-Semitism on campus. They were on a government-funded day trip. We're running out of music here quickly. Are we running out of music? We can't have that. They were on a government-funded day trip organised by the Holocaust Educational Trust and the Union of Jewish Students to take student leaders and senior staff from almost 50 universities to Auschwitz. The £144,000 grant was announced earlier this year by Sajid Javid, who was then Communities Minister. Yeah. So the students went off to Auschwitz anyway, and we can hear, I've not got any audio, I've just got to read the statements. Here are some of the statements made by some of the students. Shakira Martin, the president of the National Union of Students, who was on the Auschwitz trip, said, "Anti-Semitism is a real issue I hear about when I go across campuses." Anti-Semitism is the real issue I hear about when I go across campuses. This has entered the lexicon, this bullshit jargon. Remember years ago when a news outlet wanted you to think that an idea that it was putting across had widespread support, it would say things like, well, some people say, and nobody would ask the newscaster, who are these people? Some people say was a prelude to basically claiming that your argument had support. Now, politicians and others increasingly say things like, when I go up and down the country, people tell me. Well, what I hear when I go up and down the country, the fuck are you going up and down the country? When have you been going up and down the country? It's nonsense. So when she says, when I go across campuses, I hear about anti-Semitism, she's talking through her sphincter, is the president of the National Union of Students, because anti-Semitism doesn't exist. It's a figment of the imagination of Zionists. She says, when I took up my role as president of the NUS, there was a huge disconnection and discomfort of Jewish students within the student movement. That's horse shit. Anyway, Mohammed Omar Hajizi is the president of the Students' Union of St. George's Medical School. Any white people? Is there any white people heading up students' unions in the UK? Doesn't look like it. Mohammed Omar Hajizi, St. George Medical School Students' Union president, said, I have no background in history, and I wanted to see this for myself. It's made me wonder about the people who let this happen. Where was their moral compass? There were many Muslims among the students on this trip. And Mohammed says it's 100% important for all of us to understand what happened in the Holocaust. When I get back, my main goal will be to get people to talk to one another. Now, that's what's going on, right? Go to Gaza, I would say. If you want to learn about anti-Semitism, if you want to see anti-Semitism in practice, if you want to see the brutal subjugation of one group of people by another group of people in the biggest concentration camp in the world, go to Gaza. Now, Norman Finkelstein, who's been on this programme with me several times, whose parents, by the way, were interned at Auschwitz, top man, lovely guy Norman, vilified for a book he wrote called The Holocaust Industry. Here's a little clip from a documentary made by Norman about 10 years ago. It is so relevant today. Listen carefully to what Norm Finkelstein says here.
Whenever Israel faces a public relations debacle or comes under pressure to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict, they start up this extravaganza called the new anti-Semitism. As it's usually understood, anti-Semitism means an irrational hatred of Jews, born simply of the fact that they are Jewish. But that's not what's going on. Here it's a hostility born of the fact that the state which claims to represent them is engaged in quite brutal violence. I'm sure lots of people I meet have this, what you say, deep down inside, they have this kind of queasy feeling about Jews. I'm sure that's true. But did it have any real substantial repercussions on me in life? The answer is just no. There's a kind of pathological narcissism, navel contemplation. When you are the richest, wealthiest, most successful ethnic group in the United States, you've got the world on a platter, and you sit around and you're talking about anti-Semitism. It's just kind of shameful, I think.
Brilliant stuff. That was about 10 years ago, and queasy feelings that some people might have about Jews. By Jews, he means Israeli Jews. He basically explains very succinctly there why, A, people might be feeling queasy or feeling suspicious of Israel and Israeli Jews. And also in the same breath, he points out how ridiculously narcissistic it is for the most successful ethnic minority group on planet Earth to be navel-gazing about this particular issue. If you listen to Paul Craig Roberts talk to me last night about the presence, you know, Jews make up about 1.5, is it, or 1.8% of the demographic in the United States of America, something like that. And yet the influence of Zionist Jews in that country. Jews are 1,000 times more likely to make it to an Ivy League university in the United States, 1,000 times more likely than your typical average white guy or white girl. Why is that? And Finkelstein has said over the years, you know, with the success of the identity group that is Jews, why harp on and cry and whinge about anti-Semitism, which doesn't really exist anyway? Well, there's a political end to it, as he explained very succinctly there. It is outrageous to be spending government money sending students to go to Auschwitz so that they can come back and combat Jew hatred, which does not exist in this country on any level. It does not. It is lunacy. I'll leave you with one final quote on this story from the NUS president, Shakira Martin. Fucking Shakira. Give me a break. She said, I want to help students understand. Hang on. I want to help students understand the Holocaust, to support Jewish students, and to fight all forms of racism and discrimination. As citizens, this is part of our history, and we need to ensure that nothing like this happens again. I hope I will be brave enough to speak out and to challenge this behaviour.
What kind of fuckery is this?
That's plain old fuckery, Amy. And little or no condemnation of this in the UK press today. I say again, and I don't say it for effect, and I don't say it to get a pat on the back, metaphorically speaking. If you want to witness anti-Semitism in action, go and look at what the IDF does on a daily basis to Palestinian men, women and children. That is the purest form of anti-Semitism there is. Simple as that. Shall we move on? 19 and a half minutes past the hour. I see there's been a lot of tweets on that. Try and get to a few of them in a minute. It's the Richie Allen Show for Wednesday, 21st of November 2018. Here's a very serious story. Children under 10 are among those given strong antidepressants even in the UK. Let me repeat that again. Children under 10 among those given strong antidepressants here in the UK. What's really annoying and very disturbing about this is that GPs have long been given guidance not to do that, not to give antipsychotic medication to children, yet they continue to do so. Let me read you a little bit of the story. It's very important. Children aged 10 and under are among hundreds of young people being given strong antidepressant drugs in breach of official guidance. Guidance, again, official guidance not to do it. And the drugs they are being given can increase the risk of suicide. Figures show that 600 children and teenagers were given paroxetine and venlafaxine. Yeah, venlafaxine. Venlafaxine last year. Paroxetine, I think, is Prozac, or is it the other one? Last year. Government guidance cautions against this because of increased suicidal thoughts and behaviour in younger people. But doctors are doing it anyway, right? Saying that it's a last resort. According to guidance from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, antidepressants should be a last resort for under 18s. And in those instances, only fluoxetine, Prozac. Right, I got it wrong. Fluoxetine is Prozac. The other two that I mentioned are very strong antipsychotic drugs. So experts are saying, as a last case scenario, give the child some Prozac as absolutely last resort. But you should not be using venlafaxine and the other one, which is paroxetine. You shouldn't be using those. But yet, doctors are prescribing them anyway. Wow. Why? Think about that. Big day for stories about children in the UK media anyway. The BBC has reported today that the number of children classed as having a gambling problem has quadrupled to more than 50,000 in just 2 years. Quadrupled. In 2 years, so divide 50,000 by 4, right? Right? So about 12,500 kids had a gambling problem. Now it's over 50,000. We're talking about 11 to 16-year-olds. 450,000 children between 11 to 16 are betting regularly, more than those who have been using drugs, smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol. Right? A campaigner on the issue called it a generational scandal. Today's findings by the Gambling Commission makes worrying reading and serves as a warning to parents, said Alan Smith, who's a reverend at the he's a bishop actually in St Albans. Young People in Gambling report found over the last 12 months 39% of 11 to 16 year olds have spent their own money on gambling, and 14% of them gambled in the previous week. The figures are they're beyond disturbing, right? The analysis also suggests that 1 in 7 boys followed betting brands on social media, and they're accessing free games on websites run by William Hill, by Ladbrokes, by Paddy Power, by 888.com. They download the apps because they get free games which lure them in, not to mention that they're exposed to gambling ads every time they watch sport on television non-stop. Gamble, 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 gamble. Isn't that lovely? Fucking their minds up, basically. So children are being seduced by phones and tablets and laptops, hypnotised. They're on them all the time, altering their minds, playing free online games. While this is going on, they're getting vaccinated 25, 30 times before they're 13 years old. They're being told in schools that they might not be the gender they think they are. And by the way, don't go anywhere. We've got a drag queen coming in to read a fucking story for you. Right? All this is going on. I haven't turned into Mary Whitehouse here. Absolute all-out assault on the minds of children, not only in this country but around the world. And just to make you laugh, the BBC also reported today that Bet365's Denise Coates is the highest paid executive in the country. She'll get £265 million this year. Nice money if you can get it. Imagine it. Co-founder of online gambling firm Bet365's Denise Coates has received another bumper pay rise. The firm's accounts show that compensation for her this year will rise to £265 million. Destroying people's lives gambling. And she's making £265 million a year. That's not an exaggeration what I said either about the screen time, the sophisticated software in those devices, the effect it's having on children's minds. Physiologically, we can see it under the MRI scan. They're being blasted with vaccinations more than they need. They don't need any, really, if we're to be honest about it. They're being told that they have to consider things like sexual orientation when they're only barely out of nappies. We're just completely mining, drilling down into their minds, planting explosives and then running away. That's what's happening. It's absolutely crazy. And we're going to hear a story about bullying in schools in a minute. That's related to what I've just spoken about there. You might have heard Ollie Barrett in the news at the top of the hour talking about Theresa May going to Brussels today to meet Jean-Claude Juncker, ever the drunker, in Brussels. He's the EU Commission President, of course. And she's going there to try and finalise a Brexit deal in time for Sunday's Summit of European Leaders. The remaining 27 member states in the European Union meet on Sunday, hopefully, well, not from my point of view, but from the European Union's point of view, hopefully to rubber stamp this deal that the UK has agreed with the European Union. Now, the European Union missed its deadline yesterday to complete the text of its declaration on future relations with the with the United Kingdom. This is interesting because it kind of segues into this notion that this transition period is going to be extended beyond the end of 2020, which it will be. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. What made me laugh today is that France and Spain has been saying that those countries want more access to the UK's waters, to its fishing grounds. And the Prime Minister is under pressure, Theresa May is, from her own MPs right now, not to give any further ground and not to give any more away, which I find, frankly, laughable. It's laughable. She's basically signed up to keeping the United Kingdom in the European Union anyway. And then Peter's saying, don't give any more away while you're over there. Moron. What a gangster. I could be here all day talking about Theresa May and the crimes of Theresa May and her husband Philip May. The crimes she committed when she was Home Secretary. Real crimes, not made up ones by a conspiracy research radio host. Serious crimes. I'm not going to get into it. And presumably May will give away access to the UK's coastal waters as well this week. Why not? You've given everything else away, right? I had a laugh this morning. Deborah Haynes, Sky News Foreign Affairs editor, was summing up a report for Basecamp. She was speaking back to a presenter in the main studio, and she was kind of hinting that the French and the Spanish want access to the UK's territorial waters. And while doing so, she explained what it is the UK is facing from Brussels. Basically, that the European Union wants to punish the UK for leaving as a deterrent to any other country that might have the temerity to want to leave. Listen to this brief clip from Deborah Haynes.
And then on top of that, we have countries like France coming out and saying that they're concerned about fisheries, about rights to fish in British waters, very much wanting the status quo to remain. Obviously, that's something that for the UK, particularly the Brexiteers, don't like. And then overall on the EU side is this overwhelming sense that they do not want Brexit to be seen for the UK as a win. They want life to be less comfortable for a country outside the EU than within, because obviously they're worried that if that's not the case, other countries may seek to leave as well.
Yeah. Who amongst us has ever had to negotiate their way out of a membership of a club? You just haven't ever done that, have you? You might have tried to leave a gym and they might have offered you all sorts of inducements to stay. And then you might have changed your mind, or you probably just left anyway. I changed my internet provider and television channel provider a few weeks ago. I told you about that because the service I was getting was dreadful. But I didn't have to negotiate my way out of it. I didn't have to meet anybody. I didn't have to offer them sweeteners in return for letting me walk away. I just told them to fuck off, basically. I'm leaving. Your service is dreadful. You've left me down too many times. I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else. And that's the way it is. And of course, it's what we should have done back in 2016. We should have said, well, we're leaving. Oh, we have to No, we don't have to negotiate anything. You will not punish the selling of UK goods into European markets. You won't do that, because if you do, we'll reciprocate and we will fuck you back to the Stone Age. That's what we will do. We will destroy the German and French car manufacturing industries. So don't play those games with us. We're leaving. We're gone. Thank you. We can have a nice relationship in the future. You play ball. We'll play ball. Adios. Bye-bye. Au revoir. Whatever it is. Piss off. Right? Job done. That's what should have happened. That isn't wishful thinking. And it isn't the uneducated rant of an ignoramus, again, presenting an independent radio show. I've done my research. I know this to be true. And of course, the UK media now is bending over backwards to plant an idea in the minds of people that leaving with no deal is catastrophic, when it isn't. Couldn't be catastrophic. How could it be? Oh, we won't get our medicines, we won't get our insulin, diabetics will be dropping dead all over the fucking country. I'll tell you what we'll do. Why don't we build some factories and make our own insulin? How about that? Put English people to work. British people. Put them to work making insulin. Why have pharmaceutical companies that are owned by the Germans or owned by the Americans? Why don't we have our own ones? Let's make our own insulin. What are we doing here? Let's put people back to work. You know, it's crazy, but it's ridiculous. That's what they're basically planting in people's minds. You can't leave without a deal. It's crazy. And while all that's going on, the Remainers are chipping away at the legitimacy of the referendum result. Listen to Father of the House, Ken Clarke, on Sky News today. Listen to the language of this arch Europhile. He has substituted the term referendum to opinion poll. Yeah, because what happened 2 years ago wasn't a referendum, it was an opinion poll, according to Kenneth Clarke. Here he is on Sky News today. Here he is. Well, at least I thought here he is. Here he is.
Yeah, I will vote for this deal. I think it keeps everything continuous for British business, industry, investment, and it paves the way for the transition period, because the serious negotiations start now, really, about what are the long-term arrangements going to be, which will affect all our children and grandchildren.
No, I suspect many Conservative MPs on the other side will say, aha, I told you so. If Ken Clarke can support this, it just proves we're not leaving the European Union.
Well, we are leaving the European Union. Nobody said in the course of this ridiculous referendum, which most other MPs now treating as a kind of royal command, nobody said, oh, we're going to start hiring customs officers and putting in new customs barriers and regulatory differences and destroying our continuous lines of supply. A huge number of issues have to be raised, which weren't remotely in the public agenda when that opinion poll was taken.
When that opinion poll was taken, it's not a referendum now. First of all, it was a ridiculous referendum, and now it's an opinion poll. That's all that happened. It's like a bad dream. Ken Clarke must have been a huge fan of Dallas back in the day. Do you remember that whole season of Dallas that was wiped out at the stroke of a producer's pen because ratings had dipped and they needed to bring back Bobby Ewing? Who played Bobby Ewing in Dallas? I can't remember. Patrick Duffy. That's what it is. To Remainers and to tyrants, the referendum never happened, or it's an opinion poll, or it's just ridiculous. This is pretend it never happened. We'll just erase the whole 2 years out of our history and we'll bring Bobby Ewing back in the shower and we'll stay in the European Union and everything will be hunky-dory.
Was taken last year. We are leaving politically. I regret that. I mean, I voted against invoking Article 50. But the majority of the House of Commons has just resigned itself to leaving politically. But economic ties, trade ties, I think we've got to keep.
And you don't think they were on the ballot paper? Because when I talk to leaders, they say that was not what people voted for. They voted out of the single market, out of the customs union.
Yeah, a few people may have had views on the single market, but it wasn't remotely mentioned. It was all about all these...
It wasn't hardly mentioned, he said. Every single Remainer warned and threatened every time they appeared on television or radio. They threatened the nation with the spectre of leaving the single market and the customs union. They repeatedly said, if you vote to leave, there's no going back. We will be economically destroyed. We will be out of the single market and the customs union. He's telling porky pies there, is Kenneth Clarke. Imagine that. It's not a referendum anymore. It's an opinion poll. We just had an opinion poll. That's what we had. Never happened. Forget about it. Bobby Ewing is in the shower. Anyway, we're not going anywhere, right? 24 minutes to the top of the hour. Now, on this kind of mind fuckery that is being projected at the children of this country and the children of the Western world, right? Messing with their minds. By accident, I came across a woman on television this afternoon called Melanie Gould. Shouldn't call her a woman. She's 17 years old. She's basically a young woman, I suppose. Now, Melanie was on Sky to talk to Kay Burley about being bullied in school and how that had led to her changing schools a few times. Now, again, I don't want to sound remotely like a virtue signaller. I am not. I hate bullying and I hate bullies. I despise it. And I also think it must be a terrible thing for children, for parents, and obviously for children, but for parents who learn that their children are being picked on in school and being ganged up on. It must be horrendously difficult for a parent to deal with. You know, you want to protect your children. You don't want them exposed to meanness and mean-spiritedness and especially violence, right? And I've talked on the programme before about feral kids and how schools are reluctant to take on the parents of feral kids because the parents are often feral themselves. And violence must be terrifying for a child. But this is a different type of bullying. And this is kind of weird listening to this. And I don't want to diminish what this child, you know, has gone through or felt that she has gone through. But I was a bit uncomfortable listening to this because I think this kind of connects to some of the things we've talked about before, you and I, about how the perspective of children has been changed by exposure to devices, right? Spending time online a lot and what it has done to children and how it has maybe prevented them or impeded them from coping with, I don't know, a bit of trouble, coping with a bit of name calling or whatever. Have a listen to this. This is Melanie Gould, and she was asked about her own story by Sky News presenter Kay Burley. So here's Melanie.
So I'm 17 and I have had 3 primary schools and 3 high schools. I have been bullied at 5 of those 6 schools, really severely, mainly for my looks and for my interests, my hobbies. I'm a bit of a science geek. I love anything to do with biology. Also really into my films, into music, acting, all that sort of thing. But people never really seemed to understand that I was just trying to enjoy learning and enjoy education, so they picked on me for it.
5 schools, she said. And she said it was because of her looks and because she was a bit of a science geek. She was a bit different. She was into things that were maybe a bit different to her peers. So kind of a red flag went off in my mind straight away. 5 different schools. I was thinking, Anyway, not being judgmental here, just interested. Kay Burley then asked the young woman, how did the bullying manifest? This is a good question. How did it manifest? What happened exactly?
So it was mainly verbal stuff in classes. People shouting things at me and calling me names. But occasionally it did, I was slapped across the face a couple of times by classmates, which was a bit frightening.
And what happened to them? What did the authorities do about that?
Well, not too much. I was actually told a lot by the schools I was at the time that it must be something I was doing. I must be, to blame because it's happened at other schools, therefore you must be at fault. But all I ever tried to do was be a good student and a good friend to people. But people backstabbed me all the time and they just picked on me all the time.
Very interesting terminology there. Backstabbed me all the time. 5 schools backstabbing me. Mostly verbal, although a couple of times I was slapped across the face. That's absolutely inexcusable, of course. Bear with me now, I'm going places with this. Backstabbed. Yeah, a few alarm bells going off there. So what about today then? What's going on with Melanie today?
It left me with very, very bad anxiety and also depressive episodes. I went through a long period of time where I felt very suicidal because I felt like no matter what I did, no matter how much of a good person I was to other people, no matter how good my grades were, that I wasn't good enough for anyone. So I remember having to sit down and have the conversation with my mum that I thought about killing myself.
Sounds very self-indulgent, doesn't it? Difficult for me to say that. I feel very unfair. I feel a bit mean saying that. But I'm not going to self-censor. Sounds very much of the me generation, a bit narcissistic. Just a little bit, just a smidgen there, right? No matter what I did, no matter how nice I was to people, no matter what grades I got, I was backstabbed. And I felt suicidal.
Which was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it's still left me with anxiety. I'm shaking now about talking to other people. Because I'm always thinking, what are they thinking about me? What are they just saying things to be nice?
So what changed? What made you realise that life very much was worth living, that you have your whole life ahead of you and that you wanted to start to enjoy it more?
That's a good question, Kay. How did you deal with it?
More.
Well, I moved schools from the school I was at to a school called Newent Community School. And they have amazing teachers there who noticed that there was something, really bothering me because I was constantly ill, constantly just crying, and I just couldn't cope. So I spoke to the school nurse after being told I should, and she actually recommended that I went and got some counselling, which for me was a very big thing. I was very scared about going to get counselling because I'd been called an attention seeker by the bullies for how I was feeling. So it took me a lot to go and see her and then to accept that I should go and get counselling. I've just been through a year of therapy at CAMS, where they have gone through all of the things that have happened to me, and I'm actually on medication to help.
I'm on medication. Been through a year of counselling, and now I'm on medication.
I've gone through all of the things that have happened to me, and I'm actually on medication to help control my nerves. And it made me realise that what happened to me wasn't fair, that the things that they said and did weren't true, and that when I actually do speak to other people, like the incredible people I've spoken to online, people don't say these things, really.
Yeah, she's of the iGen generation. Talked about this with Jean Twenge on the programme last week. Generation born since 1995 that would have grown up in tech, effectively. I don't know how relevant that is. But I thought that was very interesting. It sounded very much like she was a bit paranoid. It also sounded like her inability to deal with a bit of criticism and a bit of name calling might have been enabled by a bit of a weak-minded parent. And rather sinisterly, if there is such a word, I don't think there is, she ended up in counselling for a year and on medication. When really, the response to people saying mean things about your looks or mean things about your interests should be fuck off and mind your own fucking business. Would you teach that to a child, Richie? If you had a child, I hear you ask, probably not in those terms, but I would say to any child of mine who said that people were saying mean things about them, number one, ignore them. Number two, develop a fairly thick skin. You're going to go through a lot of that in life. People are not going to like the things you say or the things you do, and they're going to criticise it. So toughen up a little bit and learn to give it back. And by giving it back, we don't mean call them names and be rude and insult them, but challenge them intellectually. Stand up to it. Don't go changing schools 5 times. Don't go to counselling for a year. And Jesus Christ, don't take antipsychotic medication for what is a common life occurrence. Bullying. Is it even bullying? You know? Some children having a pop at you, taking the piss out of you because you're a science geek. Some children making comments on your hair and on your face and on your body shape. Is it bullying? Does it need to result in you taking medication? Or can parents say, listen, just deal with it, you know? I'll always be there for you, you know, but deal with it. It's this iGen generation that Jean Twenge talks about. The inability to cope with life. The things that life throws up. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was worth sharing with you today. What time is it now? It's 14 minutes to the top of the hour. We are going to be hearing from Dr. Stuart Waiton in around about 10 minutes' time. Bear with me. Stuart Waiton is coming up. And on that, I mentioned earlier on in the programme that the government is now urging the poorest people in society to take in lodgers to beat the benefit cap. The benefit cap, by the way, which is screwing people to the wall and forcing many families out onto the streets. Do you know that every 11 minutes, the homeless charity Shelter has an ad running where it suggests that every 11 minutes, a family in this country is made homeless. And I've done a bit of digging into it. And it turns out they're right. Every 11 minutes, because of extreme poverty, a family ends up on the streets. And then charities like Shelter try and find them emergency accommodation. Try and get them in somewhere in the short term. This is true, by the way. And question on this in Parliament yesterday. Government ministers like Justin Tomlinson are saying, well, there's other ways people can deal with this. They can take in lodgers. These are people now who rent from housing charities or who get rent their property from local authorities effectively. This is the government's answer. Rent a room out to somebody and that might help you make ends meet. Crazy times we live in. 12 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Lots of tweets came in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a tune, and when we come back from that, I'm going to read your tweets. It is your Richie Allen Show, by the way, live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio, and richieallen.co.uk. Great to be with you. By the way, Tommy Sheridan, socialist, will be back with me on the programme tomorrow. Many of you will be happy to hear that. Tommy's got a very big following. He's doing a lot for Sputnik News right now. Really good guy is Tommy. He'll be on the programme tomorrow. Just giving you the heads up because so many of you like hearing from Tommy. And it's been quite a while since Tommy was on the Richie Allen Show. Oh yeah. My name is Richie Allen, by the way. Did I tell you that? I did. Did I? I'm off to Auschwitz for some re-education this weekend. And when I come back, I'm going to fucking eradicate anti-Semitism from Manchester. Oh yeah. There's no place for anti-Semitism in our society. Right, this is music from Chris Rea then as we approach 11 minutes to 6 as we're live. Back with Dr. Stuart Waiton in a couple of minutes. Chris Rea on the Richie Allen Show, The Road to Hell Part 2 for the technophobes amongst you. I like to be technically correct there. From the Road to Hell album. Massive amount of tweets came in. If I start attempting to read them, I'll be here all day. Alright. I'll read a few anyway. Delroy tweets, how you doing, Delroy? Richie, good analysis there of what the kids are being put through. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't resemble, not remotely resemble, the childhood that I had in terms of my schooling. Anyway, it's bizarre. And I'll be 44 years old on December 31st this year. Yes, I had stingy relatives, I did, who came along on Christmas Day and gave me a present and said, that's for your birthday as well. Boy, do you hear me? So I'll be 44. It's not that long ago I went through primary school and secondary school, and it is crazy what's happening. And I know that's a very cliched throwaway line. It's crazy. Well, what does that mean, it's crazy? It is lunatic asylum stuff, what's happening to children in schools. There's no doubt about it. Ian McKee tweets, how you doing, Ian? Richie, 10 years from now, if you don't have mental health issues or therapy, you'll be called weird. Yeah. That crept into America, didn't it? It crept into American culture in the 1980s. It was a badge of honour to have a shrink and to be on some sort of medication. Incredibly. Hi to William, who says, Richie, the majority of kids have some sort of problem at school in one way or another over time. But I would say a lot of the time, moving school is the wrong option. I must say, though, to have moved 5 times should raise questions of the student and the schools in question. Yeah, that's the problem, really. I probably didn't need to spend 5 or 10 minutes with those clips of that interview to make that point, but I wanted to do it. Somebody asking, you know, some kids being a bit mean-spirited to a girl shouldn't result in 5 school changes, counselling for a year and medication. It's absolutely wrong. You know, you can teach a child. Listen, don't worry about it, you know. I was taught that growing up. I was a tall, skinny child. So I was often called Lanky Allen, Skinny Allen, these stupid things that kids would say to me. But because I had a very bad male role model in my life that I've mentioned before, but I had a good one as well, who used to say to me, just ignore them. They're morons, you know. Ignore them and don't do anything about it unless it gets physical. And if it gets physical, you've got 2 options. You know, I'll deal with it or you can deal with it. That's what I was told by my old granddad. They call you names, Richie, just ignore it. And they did call me names, being tall and skinny with a stupid haircut. I had a bowl hair. I looked like Alfalfa from the Little Rascals. You know, it's not a good look in primary school, even in South East Ireland at the time. And I was teased about it, and I just ignored it. It just made me laugh, really. And then eventually you get a reputation for being, he's all right. He doesn't give a shit, really. Paul tweets, Richie, as a parent, I want to ask, what role did her parents play in getting this girl to deal with those bullies? At her age, you'd think she would have gotten to a point where she realised the bully's power lies completely in how she reacted to the taunting. That's very good. That's it, really. Dean tweets, Richie, maybe it's a hate crime against the minority group known as geeks, although they are quickly becoming a larger group. Kids that were cerebral, smart, and who did well in exams were always teased for being smart, weren't they? Weren't they? You know, I did pretty well academically, and I was teased for it. SWAT this and brainy this and stupid names, and, you know, didn't bother me, really. Hi to Mwinga as well. Hi to Faisal. See, there's so many tweets coming in on so many different subjects. I'm getting lost here. Don't think I'm ignoring your tweets, by the way. I'm not. Thanks for them. There are hundreds of them. Hundreds have come in the first hour. I'm sorry that I've not been able to get to all of them. Patricia tweets, get children back into the real world and out of the fake world of their chosen tablets. End of depression. Of course, there's a double meaning to tablets now. It is the square tablet of Apple and of Samsung, and it is the tablets of Big Pharma as well. The children are being exposed to. That's absolutely right as well. Wonderful way to follow what people are tweeting me is to go to twitter.com, where it says search Twitter, put Richie Allen Show, all one word, press enter, and hey presto, you'll see what people are tweeting to me. Right. Before we hear from Stuart Waiton, I found this very funny because I was on The Guardian today. I've read a couple of stories from The Guardian today. I read all the broadsheets and the tabloids as part of my daily grind in the mornings, but I was on The Guardian this morning first thing, and The Guardian is running a poll. Now, I find these polls very interesting because they are loaded. They are loaded. They are pregnant with meaning, these polls, right? They've run an identity poll today. They want their readers to take a poll to find out how populist they are. The establishment, or at least the media establishment anyway, seems to be very scared of populism. Now, of course, the banking dynasties couldn't give a shite about populism. They love it. Of course they do. The Rothschild, Warburg, Oppenheimer dynasties love it. They love the fact that people are going to the extreme left and the extreme right. They love it. So long as you are populist, they don't care. So The Guardian is running this poll. It's a scientific poll designed by some academics. And The Guardian says populism is upending global politics, forcing many of us to grapple with what the concept means. Answer the questions below to find out how populist you are and how you compare with leaders such as Donald Trump. Shall we take the poll, shall we, for the crack? Let's take the poll for the crack. I'm going to take the quiz. It only takes about 90 seconds to do it anyway. Let's have a bit of background music. A bit of mood music. Right, so the first question is, where do you live right now? United Kingdom is the answer. Let's put in United Kingdom there. What age are you? 36 to 45, that'll do. And what's your gender? Male, female, or other? Let's say male for the crack. And let's start the quiz then. Right, here's the question. Here's the first question. Number 1. All of these questions, by the way, give you 7 possibilities. Strongly agree, agree, tend to agree, neither agree nor disagree, tend to disagree, disagree, or strongly disagree, right? So strongly agree down to strongly disagree with a load of options in the middle. You got it? You got it? You got it? Question 1. Politicians should always listen closely to the problems of the people. Let's put strongly agree there. Politicians should strongly listen to the people. Should listen to the people. Number 2, politicians don't have to spend time among ordinary people to do a good job. Politicians don't have to spend time among ordinary people to do a good job. This presupposes the notion that politicians are extraordinary people. So they don't have to spend time amongst the unwashed to do a good job. Just for the crack, let's put strongly disagree in there, right? Question 3. The government is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves, dear listener. Holy Jesus, it's getting interesting now. Let's put strongly agree to that one. Question 4. Government officials use their power to try to improve people's lives. Let's strongly disagree with that, number 4 there. Number 5. You can tell if a person is good or bad if you know their politics. So if they're a Tory, they're a bad bastard. If they're a Hillary supporter, they're absolutely, completely and utterly intolerable. Let's strongly disagree with that. Of course, it's ridiculous to imagine that you can tell if somebody is good or bad because of their political beliefs. Strongly disagree, we'll say. 6. Question 6. The people I disagree with politically are not evil. Let's say we strongly agree with that. They're not evil just because we disagree with them. Question number 7. The power of a few special interests prevents our country from making progress. Well, the power of a few special interests prevents us, our country, from making progress. Let's strongly agree with that there for the crack. Question 8. A lot of important information is deliberately concealed from the public out of self-interest. Let's strongly agree with that as well, because it's absolutely blinking true, isn't it? Patriotism. It just says patriotism. Strongly approve, tend to approve, neither approve nor disapprove, tend to disapprove, strongly disapprove. Patriotism. Let's say tend to approve for the crack. Although really, I neither approve nor disapprove. And number 10, nationalism. Approve, strongly approve, tend to approve, so on, so on, so on. Let's for the crack put tend to approve in for nationalism there, yeah. Free market. Let's say we strongly disapprove with the free market there. Free trade. Let's say we strongly disapprove of free trade. Renewable energy. What do you say to that? Let's say approve of renewable energy. Pollution control. Let's say strongly approve. And conservatism. Neither approve nor disapprove. Church authority. Neither approve nor disapprove. Left-wing people, couldn't care less. And socialism, strongly approve, let's say for the crack. Gay marriage, none of my business, neither approve nor disapprove. Adoption by homosexuals, finally the last question, and I'm going to say that I strongly disapprove of adoption by homosexuals because I do. What does The Guardian tell me then? It tells me that I am most like the Mexican president Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and that I am on the populist left. If you want to do that poll, by the way, go to theguardian.com and do it. If you don't want to waste time, don't do it. Right, let's move on, shall we? 4 minutes past the hour. Loads of tweets, by the way. There are so many of them. I'm going to leave them because I want to get on to Stuart Waiton, who is a criminologist, an author, and spends these days lecturing at Abertay University in Dundee. Very interesting man. He's been on this programme many times talking about free speech issues and the like. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Stuart wrote in the Scottish Herald about transgender issues. And he asked or wrote about very benignly, very fairly and very balanced, in a very balanced way, he wrote about the hegemony of trans activists and the inability for people to question the trans issues that have been put before us, that we've spoken about so many times on this programme, question these issues without being labelled as transphobic or as bigoted. He wrote an excellent article about why governments have intervened in this area and why people who ask questions are marginalised and are bigoted. The article is in the Herald. Now, we talk quite a lot, not just about trans issues, but we talk a lot as well about justice issues and the notion of restorative justice, which is hugely interesting. On the issue of trans rights, I first asked Dr. Stuart Waiton of Abertay University, isn't it really strange how this has become a front and centre issue in such a very short period of time? In short, isn't it amazing how this is suddenly everywhere? This is what Stuart Waiton told me earlier today.
Yeah, I think there's something peculiar about our modern times that you get this. I think politics is so fluid and ungrounded, and we don't seem to have any very many anyway clear norms, so that you can. Well, gay marriage is another one. So 10 years ago, gay marriage, never heard of it really, and within the space of no time at all, top Tories were saying, if you're not into gay marriage, you're an outrageous bigot, and etc. So that was another one. It just came from absolutely nowhere. As far as I can tell, it wasn't a thing that people were demanding massively. But again, it's almost like the smaller and smaller proportion of people you can find that has an issue, the more of an impact it has. Because the number of transgender people in society and the world is unbelievably small, and yet, as you say, it is having an unbelievably big impact on a very confused society.
In so many ways, in education particularly, in public life. And your article deals very specifically, well, it doesn't specifically deal with, but it raises a few important questions. One of which is the response to those who ask a few questions, whether they be benign questions or even if they're loaded questions, who cares, but just basic questions. You talk about the changes being made in schools and universities, and the response to people asking questions is, I would say, and I'm not easily disturbed, I don't think you are either, but it is fairly disturbing. People are kind of hit like a ton of bricks when they ask fairly simple questions, as you've seen yourself.
Yeah, well, the first Twitter storm against me.
You know you've arrived, Stuart. You've arrived.
Well, I did think that. A Twitter shower, perhaps, is more real. But yes, so after I wrote my article, which I thought was quite balanced, it was really just an attempt to try and explain why I think it's happening. There were, I think it was the university's LGBT, etc. society, kicked up a fuss, and there was calls for me to be re-educated or to be sacked, or someone should take me out, and quite a bit of pressure, quite a lot of people chipping in. Apparently, I refused to look. This is all from my daughter and my girlfriend looked at. I refused to look, partly because some ex and current students of mine were sort of chipping in, and I thought, well, I don't really want to know who that is in case it annoys me. And the university was under pressure. I was under pressure. You could tell that everyone in the university seemed to know about this and was gossiping about it. And some people saying, "How am I still working here?" I mean, unbelievable things like that.
That's not funny, Stuart. Let me deal with that for a minute. That isn't funny. That now I've over the years interviewed many an academic whose job became under threat because of their vicarious opinions on whatever. I could drop names here. I won't. I mean, people like, I'll drop one or two. Norman Finkelstein being one, an old pal of mine, has been very critical of the state of Israel, lost his tenure at Paul University many years ago. It's not funny when people start demanding that professors start losing their jobs because they've offered an opinion, right? That isn't funny. Is that something that's worried you?
Well, it partly worried me because I then wrote an article on rape, which was not very popular with my colleagues. And the two things come together. I did feel under a little bit of pressure, I must admit. And I wasn't sure how the university was going to react because they were under pressure, because everyone has a diversity policy, which seems to... It seems to be a kind of therapeutic policy as much as anything, where you shouldn't upset people, and if you upset people, it's seen. In fact, the way it's portrayed is you're creating an atmosphere of hostility, and then some people then say, well, and that leads to violence. Therefore, me writing an article in a newspaper that's trying to understand something becomes directly connected to violence, etc., etc. But the university was brand new and stood by the idea that you should have academic freedom. You should be open to discuss these ideas and issues as you should do. In fact, there was a letter came out about a week after I wrote my article by I'm trying to remember her name, Kathleen Stock, I think it is, with a number of academics that had signed it, all who had come under pressure because they were trying to do some sort of research on the transgender issue. And The Guardian printed it, which is interesting, saying this is an issue, this is a problem, we demand the right to be able to do research in this area without being attacked for it. So that seems to be the state of play at the minute.
Yeah, there used to be a time, I think in conversations gone by, you and I have spoken about how things used to be. You know, robust debate. There was a time when your opponents, if we can call them that, people who disagree with you. And by the way, I've got to say again, while we're speaking, and of course this is recorded, but I'll be live in the studio tweeting the article, Stuart's opinion piece, which is a couple of weeks old now, in the Herald Scotland, heraldscotland.com. And it's benign. That's not to patronise the article at all. It's an excellent article asking some very interesting and important questions, but it's benign. It's not hostile towards anybody. It's just asking questions. There used to be a time when your opponents would say, all right then, Waiton, let's erect a platform in a hall at the uni and let's roll our sleeves up and have a jolly old back and forth about this. Not anymore, Stuart. We talked about this before, you and I. Now people want to obliterate from their field of vision or from their field of hearing anything which offends their delicate kind of sensitivities. Jesus, this is dangerous stuff, isn't it? What happened to, I'll have a go at you, Waiton, and you can have a go back in public?
I think it's getting worse, actually. It's interesting to note that in the past it would have been right-wing people who would try and shut you down. But even then, most right-wing people wouldn't try and shut you down, but there might be some. Or at least conservative people, very moralistic people might want to sort of like try and stop certain issues or images or whatever it was. Whereas now it seems to be people who describe themselves as progressive but are anything but, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of things. I think one of the things is the extent to which identity has become politicized. And if you then question aspects of this, it feels like a personal attack. That's part of the problem. So it's not that you're not discussing the NHS, you're discussing me, how I feel, my body, and so on. So it becomes a difficult thing to actually have a public discussion about. I think that's one of the things. On top of that, the state and politicians, diversity seems to be their biggest moral crutch. It's the one thing to stand up against racism, to stand up for gender equality, to stand up for transgender rights and so on, like as Theresa May has done and just about everybody else in public life. It gives them a sort of sense of moral goodness. It seems to be one of the few things that they're very confident that they can come out and say this, despite all the problems that it might create for society. But I think particularly at the minute, I think the Brexit-Trump effect is having an impact on people, especially people like my colleagues. And you're starting to get now a situation where academics are signing letters to stop debates. So I don't know if you saw the David Aranovich article a few weeks back in the Times.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
He'd been invited to a discussion which was titled something like, will immigrants undermine our sense of nationhood, right? And a number of academics, in fact, the list has just grown and grown, so there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of academics have signed a letter saying that debate, that title of the debate, is a disgrace because it will encourage a sensibility of white supremacism, which will lead to violence.
That's madness.
So they've essentially tried to put pressure on to either close down the debate or change the nature of the debate, or at the very least, change the title of the debate. And I think that's because they feel that the public are kicking up a fuss now. The public are now getting a voice, and they perceive the public as being rather bigoted, rather racist, and homophobic, transphobic, etc.
There's a great irony, Stuart. Yeah. There's a great irony here. In my opinion, for what it's worth, because they suppressed the feelings and the voices and made people voiceless, people in working class communities. I'm a working class boy and proud of it. And because they wouldn't listen to them and marginalised them and ignored them for years, you know, sometimes people turn to anybody who listened to them. So even if it's idiots on the very far right, you know, somebody's listening to me. And there's a great irony there now, you know. And you know, there's another irony. There would have been a time when those academics would have been stampeding to put their names down to be on the platform again with Aronovich and say, right, let's have a chat then about why people feel this way. But now they want to shut him down, which does nobody any good. And there's a great irony in, again, going back to transgender, the issue, again, your article asking brilliant questions. How ironic it is that some people would argue that your article is harmful. Again, that's, to me, preposterous, because what's really harmful is suppressing debate on it. And it seems that the harm is being caused to maybe children who are being put on puberty-blocking drugs, which, again, a lot of academics are asking questions about, saying it's not a good thing. That could be potentially devastatingly harmful, while asking some questions about why are we rushing to, you know, not discuss gender dysphoria? Why are we rushing to allow people self-identify without discussion? That can't be harmful, but yet real harm might be occurring to children right now.
Yeah, well, it's the point I make in the article, which is really why I wrote it, was because there's been a 4,000% increase in the number of girls wanting to transition. And I think there are political and cultural reasons for this. I don't think it's to do with people have suddenly discovered miraculously that they have a different body inside a body or anything like that. And I think one of the most profoundly worrying and immature aspects of this is the extent to which the state, politicians, schools and so on have simply embraced this and in many respects are encouraging children. And this is children. I mean, adults is a different matter. If adults want to do stuff to their bodies, knock yourself out. But this is children. And without stepping back a little bit and having a think, well, how does adolescence work? How does their sense of identity, if people are then suddenly flattered or encouraged, if there are trans activists online encouraging this, if there's peer influence, there's lots of things happening here which I think need to be unpicked. And for the state to then step in, and they are doing this to a certain extent, and saying, well, actually, we know better than their parents. We really know better about what this is because we're cool about the whole trans issue. And in Scotland, this is potentially what's going to happen with new sort of proposed guidelines. Is to suggest that teachers
shouldn't tell the parents.
Shouldn't tell parents. Yeah,
wow.
shouldn't tell the parents. And in fact, if the parents are opposed to the transition, then perhaps the parents should be reported for that. So, I mean, a remarkable thing. And if this happens, I mean, I think this could hugely blow up in the face of politicians. I think it could become incredibly confusing for parents. It could be incredibly confusing for young people, essentially children who are growing up in this very confused atmosphere. And I think it could really blow up and become a massive, massive problem and a massive issue.
Yeah, this weekend, the Mail on Sunday had a couple of interesting articles. One from a whistleblower teacher who reckons there are more than a dozen children at his or her school. The teacher is anonymous. And the teacher is worried about it. But also a psychotherapist wrote in the Mail on Sunday, you probably saw it, suggesting that there is an autism link with this. And there's also a link between children encouraging other children to do it. That's where the politicisation comes in and the cultural issues that you were talking about there as well. But there was a kind of a sense that there's a feeling amongst psychotherapists, at least the one writing in the Mail anyway, that the government just wants to ignore this, just to ignore these facts or these evidence, these bits of academic, research coming in that says maybe we shouldn't be going down this road. The government just wants to ignore it. They are worrying times. Anytime somebody suggests that, we deal with the child and the issues around a child without telling the parents, massive red flag for me, Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a big problem in Scotland that they tried to introduce this thing called the named person, which is sort of basically a state paid professional who would oversee the well-being interests of every child from birth, or actually from pre-birth. So Scotland is well on track for setting up a situation where professionals rather than parents make more and more decisions about what values children have and what happens with their lives. So it's a definite trend, definite issue and a problem for me. And yeah, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people who are trying to introduce some reason into this discussion. And as far as I can see, the people in authority who are essentially being blind to this, and I'd be interested. I haven't yet had a proper discussion with any of these people, but to me it seems like a form of moralism. They've decided that this is good. It's like gay rights. That's all it is. So therefore it's progressive. Therefore it's good. It's diversity. End of story. Regardless of the actual impact this is having, regardless of all the other factors that might influence this, regardless of the fact that we're talking about children.
Yeah, children.
About children and adolescents who are, can be a little bit self-absorbed at the best of times. I think they have a right to be self-absorbed when you're an adolescent. I think that comes with a job description.
Yeah.
And they appear completely unprepared to try and even think about what is actually happening here and what potential problems they are creating for individuals and for society, actually.
Let me just remind our listeners, Dr. Stuart Waiton from Abertay University is on the line with me today. It's great to have him back on the programme. I want to ask you about restorative justice. I'm also mindful of time. I know you've got plenty of things to do. You can tell me anyway, I've got thick skin, that you've had enough any minute that you want. But before I ask you about restorative justice, do you sometimes feel like a bit of a lone voice? I don't want to harp on this thing about academic freedom, because I am very concerned about academic freedom. I've been through university twice for my sins, as a student. I've done some teaching of or in the areas of radio production for City and Guilds and stuff like that, but I've never taught or lectured. But I am very concerned about the Twitter storms that blow up, like we talked about earlier on, and the potential for universities and colleges to be put under pressure by a seeming storm, against a man or a woman who's just had, an opinion or ventured an opinion on these issues, on the named parent and this trans agenda. Do you feel like a bit of a lone voice? Because I don't see too many other people talking about it.
Well, the trans thing is interesting because, I got interested in this subject last year, and I wrote an article for the Times. And as soon as I wrote an article, I had a number of feminists get in touch with me, because feminists are, for good reasons and bad reasons, often opposed to the transgender framework. They look at it and see this is a man who's now going to be using women's toilets. This is a man who's now, so for example, the Labour Party has a trans guy who's now a woman as their women's officer.
Yeah.
And he then put in a complaint about another women's officer, a real woman, if you're allowed to use that term.
You can.
Because saying that she was transphobic and so on. So you get these sort of peculiar situations emerging. But again, it makes it an interesting discussion, the trans one, because if the feminists weren't there to oppose it, it would be more difficult. But because the feminists, or many feminists, oppose what's happening with the transgender framework, lesbian activists, for example, not all, but a fair few as far as I can tell, are horrified by this because they think, and I think they may have an argument, that what's happening is that lesbian girls are basically now in this context, in this sort of political environment, being encouraged to change their gender or change their sex. So they're horrified by it. So that means that there's a bit of a chink in the armor of diversity, because a substantial section of feminist activists are making the point that actually a woman is something that does have a biological basis. You can't just turn into a woman. Even if you have an operation, it still doesn't make you a woman. So they're making lots of arguments, and that, I think, is a real weakness for the politicians and the authorities, because it's, as I say, it's a chink in the diversity armor. They're not all singing from the same hymn sheet. And in fact, the Lesbian Gay Society, when they put it on Facebook and people were commenting on my article, there was quite a few of them apparently making the point, well, I actually think he's got a point. I think he should be able to speak his mind and so on. And the vast majority of the public are questioning about this. Vast majority. When they do polls on this, you're talking about 85% of people don't think that you should just be able to sort of say I am this or I am that. You just say which gender you are, because that's what I feel like. That's what I say. So there's a lot of space. There's a lot of space to make the arguments, I think, even if the people in authority and the institutions are weak, nervous, or potentially authoritarian on it.
It's a good point, that, and I've interviewed a couple of trans women, that's men who identify as women, and they described themselves as such on the programme. I'm a man, Richie, who identifies as a woman, and they're not happy at all about the way things are going, and I like that, not just because they agree with my central thinking, but I like the fact that they're prepared to stand up and be heard. Stuart, you're a criminologist and you're an author, and I'll be putting out links to where people can find you and read you. By the way, the couple of times you've been on the programme in the past, we've had a huge reaction to you, massive reaction to it. It's great to have you on. I appreciate your time, knowing that you're busy up there in Dundee. You're a criminologist, and I saw it of you the other morning. I was out jogging, listening to BBC Radio 5 Live, and the rugby player Gareth Thomas was on, and apparently he was assaulted, Gareth, and seriously enough as well. He was pretty marked up around the head. A young 16-year-old lad had assaulted him, had verbally abused him, and then attacked him, which certainly can't have been nice. And I had heard the term that I can't pronounce for my sins, restorative justice. I've heard that term before, and I didn't know much about it. And Thomas seemed to explain that he was going to have, or had, a sit down with the boy who assaulted him, and they were going to talk it out, and he was going to explain, to him what he had done, why it was wrong, things along those lines. And I thought for a minute, because I don't know very much about it, I thought, well, yeah, that's interesting, and maybe. And then some policemen came on to say, we have seen that 15% of people, when we use restorative justice on people who have offended before, 15% of those repeat offenders actually don't offend again. I thought, okay, well, is it good? And then I thought, well, it's marvellous for the 16-year-old. He kind of gets away with it, and maybe he won't change his ways. What is it? What is this restorative justice? Where does it come from?
Right. I'll try not to get too bogged down in sort of jargon and stuff.
Okay.
So bear with me as I sort of like stumble through it.
The For Dummies guide. Give us the For Dummies guide on, and me being the dummy. Go ahead.
Well, restorative justice it's come out of a sense, especially by liberalish people, that they've got a problem with prison, and they've got a problem with punishment, right? Some of these concerns they have, I think, are legitimate. Some perhaps less so. And what they did is they came across the idea of, well, let's look at how people used to do things in the past, Maoris, for example, or Aborigines, and how did communities do things? And communities, before you had a state, had to resolve problems, right? Because there was no prison to put anybody in. If someone had stolen your whatever, you had to deal with that there and then. And they used to do it as a community. And they used to get the person who had committed the wrong act, the person who was wronged, get them together, have a consultation, get someone to apologize. And the theory is that by doing this, you get the person, the perpetrator, to have to look the person in the eye, to recognize what they've done, to understand the harm that they have impacted. And the victim can see the person, can question them. They are involved in the criminal justice system in a way that they might not be otherwise. They get a sense of closure. It's very, very therapeutic. Right? It's a very, very therapeutic form of justice that presumes that individuals and communities are kind of harmed, abused, that they need healing. And this process is meant to be that healing. Now, do you want me to tell you how it works?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's genuinely fascinating stuff. This
right.
Is really
so
interesting.
the way it works, and I'll say before I start, I think that this can work for kids, and I think it can't really work for adults. And at the minute in Scotland, for example, they use it in youth justice, but they don't use it with adults. But there is a push for it to be used with adults, and certainly anyone who is progressive, right thinking, is into restorative justice and thinks that this is the way forward. So it's entirely possible that this might become something of significance in the future. So the way it works is 16-year-old Johnny attacks a Pakistani shopkeeper's shop, covers it in paint, swears at him and so on. The kid is got, in Scotland, it'll go through a sort of youth justice process, but essentially what they do is they ask the shopkeeper if he would like to be part of a restorative justice process. And they ask the young lad if he is prepared to apologise. Now, the shopkeeper has to be prepared to forgive. If he is not prepared to forgive, it won't happen. The kid has to be prepared to apologise and to mean it. Otherwise, it will not happen. And so there are many meetings potentially with professionals, with these two individuals, before they eventually have a conference. Then they're brought together. The shopkeeper can ask questions of the lad. The lad can explain what he did, how he's sorry, and so on. And that's the end of it. Now, the reason I think that this might make sense for kids is because it's a bit like the headmaster getting you in his office.
Yeah.
Getting the person who you've just, so I got the cane when I was like 15 or something, for like me and my mate did a pile on where you like jump on somebody and all pile on. The two of us did this, which we shouldn't have done. He was upset, crying, blah, blah, and we got the cane. And it's a kind of, they bring the lads, do you understand what you've done? Are you going to apologise? And so on. Yes, sir, I'm sorry. I didn't realise I was going to hurt him, etc., etc. Right? That makes sense to me. I think if you then, and that's what happened in this case. So he was a 16-year-old. He'd been homophobic to this rugby lad.
Yeah.
And did I don't know if he's a big 16-year-old or what. So I don't know how he managed to sort of get this rugby bloke who I imagine's a bit of a big lad, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So that's what happens in that station. He says, well, I want to do this thing because it's educative. And you often, I had someone in my class yesterday talking on this subject, and it's often driven by people who are good guys who want to give kids a second chance. They don't want to get them tied into the criminal justice system. They want to do something, but they'd rather not have to sort of like have some sort of criminal conviction and so on.
It's nice,
so
isn't it? It's nice. Yeah. The way you're describing it, I think, is the way Gareth Thomas is. I'm a bit of a rugby buff, and Thomas has always come across as a fairly nice guy. He's very mild-mannered. He's a very generous co-host when he does the rugby. Very much listens to his fellow pundits. Seems to be a nice fella. And he's thinking, because that is a jailable offence, or at least for a kid, that's a young offender's institution offence. It's a very serious offence. And Thomas is thinking, well, who knows what might happen to him in there. All right, let's do this. And hopefully the kid will be remorseful. And when he meets him and speaks to him, he will say, yeah, you are a human being. You are a nice fella. And it's unacceptable for me to be swearing at you, let alone punching you in the face, maybe. I can see, like you were saying, how it could work there in that instance for the kid, you know. And who knows what the kid's been exposed to anyway, growing up as well, which is important, maybe. I'm sounding like a progressive. Jesus, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble here. But no, it just makes sense to me.
But we are progressive.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Progressives aren't progressive nowadays, most of
No, that's true, yeah. So that sounds good, but you don't see this lending itself to the adult justice system?
No, I don't. Well, I mean, if I was going to go into it properly, I'd probably get you in areas you don't want to go, because I think this is part of a development of a therapeutic state where increasingly people in authority understand people as little bags of emotion. And they think that if we can heal, there's this idea of healing, you know, it's like if we apologize to the Aborigines, if we apologize for past harms, if we apologize for, you know, and then it's this highly therapeutic kind of framework that's developing in the state. And I think this is a reflection of that. And I think there's lots of problems that come with it, not least of all that I think it's almost like a new form of authoritarianism, but it's actually through the management of emotions.
Can I ask you a question on that? Can I ask you, you're throwing up questions in my mind. The way you're framing this would concern me. And I know nothing about it, and I absolutely trust you implicitly, and you're obviously telling me the way it is, and I expect you absolutely are. What? No, I know.
My opinion.
Yeah, no, I know it's your opinion, but I'm listening to you. It's beginning to make a kind of a sense to me. So, little bags of emotion therapy, that could lead to medicating people. There's the conspiracy theory now. That could lead to rolling out, well, this guy, well, he needs to be on a bit of medication, or, you know, we have courses, and on those courses we often see a prescribed drug. That would concern me. It could lead down an avenue like that, Stuart, or am I being paranoid?
Well, I don't think you need restorative justice for that. I think that's happening
anyway.
Already. More and more people are on, whether it's Prozac or antidepressants or everything else. So I don't think you need it for that. But yes, I can see where you're going. But you don't need that, you see, because I think one of the problems I have with this is that it's kind of manipulative. That there's a certain pressure on the victim to get involved, and if you have a professional going around to your house and saying, you know, you don't have to do this, but, you know, there's this process, it's called restorative justice, blah, blah. Would you like to think about it? And it's almost like you're kind of putting a little bit of pressure on people to say, well, okay, I'll forgive. Yeah, I will forgive, rather than forgiveness being a kind of a natural thing, or in fact, allowing people to just move on.
Yeah.
Which is another concern I have, that it's, to me, this is a very individualistic form of justice, where rather than thinking, as we did, if someone commits a crime, we take it out of your hands, you get on with your life, and we deal with this. It's saying, well, actually, we realise that there are problems in society, problems that individuals have, and we're going to resolve this through the criminal justice system, through this therapeutic process, and you will find healing. And there's some idea that this will sort of revitalize the person, revitalize the community, revitalize the offender, and so on. And it's rather fantastical, and it's kind of emotionally manipulative on both behalves, because again, it's always meant to be voluntary. It can come with punishment, so people in prison can go through this process. But one of my arguments that I was making yesterday is, I can't imagine any prisoner who's got any common sense turning down,
yeah,
the opportunity to apologise. Because if you do turn it down, that's not going to look good. And the people who advocate this and promote it say, no, it's entirely voluntary. There's no pressure. And I was just saying, well, put it this way: if I was inside for doing something serious and they said, look, the person wants to meet you and you can say sorry, I'd be all over it like a rash, and I'd be saying sorry to my heart's content, and it wouldn't matter. And again, in that context, what does sorry mean? If you're in prison, you're not really a free person who can make free decisions. It's, you're at the most vulnerable situation imaginable, and to then expect that this apology is a genuine apology, I just think there's so many problems with it, and I think it's infantile. I think there's an infantile aspect to it that presumes prisoners and criminals don't have any intention, that they didn't mean to do things. This maybe it's because something happened to their dad, maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. There's a kind of presumption there that that these people are kind of like lost souls, and if you brought them and they were able to apologize and they would get healing as well, and so on. So yeah, I think there's lots and lots of problems with it.
It sounds like in the future it's going to be an area or a field of research that you're going to be looking into, I think, and maybe not just yourself.
Well, I'm keeping my powder dry on it. Certainly, it's because I do think it's potentially going to develop, and if it does, it will be very interesting to see how it works with adults.
Stuart, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it. I know I said, and I do mean it, I'm not patronising or paying lip service to it. I know you're busy. It's nice that you give us your time. These are important issues. And I genuinely look forward to speaking to you again. Enjoy the rest of the day, and thanks for coming on.
Cheers. Thank you.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today. Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back. Yeah, Stuart Waiton there, PhD, Abertay University in Dundee. How fascinating that was, restorative justice. And Penny has sent me a tweet. Thanks, Penny, by the way. Richie, restorative justice was used 8 years ago when a 27-year-old man assaulted my then 11-year-old son as a way, says Penny, to let the adult off. And I've tweeted her back to suggest that obviously she wasn't happy with that. How do you say to a 27-year-old man, if he's assaulted an 11-year-old boy, that an apology and a sit down with the victim and listening to a victim impact statement is sufficient? You see, it's amazing when you listen to other points of view what you can actually pick up. When I was listening to the rugby player Gareth Thomas talking about the 16-year-old boy and who assaulted him. Now, he must be a proper toe rag, the little bastard, right? He's gone up to a man that he knows to be famous, rugby player. He's abused him, and then he's attempted to batter him, and he's properly hit him. I mean, he's properly marked him up, as I said to Stuart there. And when I heard Gareth Thomas saying, I'm up for restorative justice, I thought that's great. And I think, as I said earlier on, I think Gareth Thomas is a pretty decent fella. And he looks at the 16-year-old and thinks, well, if he goes into a young offenders institution, could be a very bad place for him to be. It might not be the best place for him to come to terms with what he did and put himself back on the right road. The right road, of course, is to leave people alone, not to be swearing at them and punching them. But when listening to Stuart there, and I was absolutely all ears when I was speaking to him this afternoon about how this is another progressive cultural Marxist idea where the state, the great protector of the vulnerable groups, categorises every man, woman and child as little bags of emotion. As he put it, those were his words, that need to be mollycoddled and handled with kid gloves. And as I was listening to that, it was actually dawning on me where that could go. Now, I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm not anything. I don't like people being locked up. You know, I've interviewed the wonderful John Lonergan, the great former governor of Mountjoy Jail in Dublin, one of the greatest humanitarian, most decent, loving men you've ever heard in your life. In fact, it's been too long since John Lonergan was on this programme. I'll have to look John up. And, you know, the answer to crime, if you're a conservative, if you're a right-winger, your answer to crime is lock them up, lock everybody up, build more jails and put more bars on windows. That's the conservative approach to criminology, to dealing with crime. I suppose the champagne socialist way to deal with crime is to constantly cry for the perpetrator of the crime and, oh, he had a terrible life and he grew up in poverty and he was beaten up, God love him. Now, I grew up in very difficult circumstances and I had the shit beaten out of me morning, noon and night for years until I was able to defend myself and stop it. And I knew nothing but violence as a young man. But I don't go around beating people up. I don't go around solving my problems or my grievances with people through violence. They're just beating people up, hammering people. I don't do that. So it's a nonsense. But at the same time, when people grow up in extreme poverty and all they get is screaming and shouting and, you know, abandonment of parental duties, and when they get beaten up, for some children, they will, of course, grow up to be little thugs, of course. But I found that very interesting that. I hadn't heard much about restorative justice, you know, and what it might be. And, of course, it sounded great to me, you know. Penny got back to me and said, Richie, not at all. It turned out the adult had friends in the police. That's not good, Penny, is it? So the 27-year-old who assaulted the 11-year-old knew somebody in the police who said to him, presumably, there's a way out of this if we can agree to restorative justice. But from what Stuart said, the victim must agree with the restorative justice path. Both parties must agree in order for it to be proceeded with, for want of a better way of putting it there. So is that what happened, Penny? Did you think, okay, well, if the police say it's the right thing to do, then we'll do it? Because that's my understanding of it. It's something I definitely want to explore, to be honest, in the near future. Because I think it's a fascinating concept. Restorative justice. You know, it sounds great. Meet with the victim. Let the victim explain to the perpetrator the impact the crime had on him or her. Get the conversation going. Sounds all very benign and very good, but as Stuart Waiton pointed out, there are sinister connotations to it, if you think about it. Hi to Sean McDonald, by the way. How you doing, Sean? Faisal was very interested in what Stuart was saying in terms of juxtaposing actual sincere progressives from pseudo-progressives who are just thinly disguised fascists. And that's very good, because he jumped all over me, did Stuart, when I said, I'm starting to sound like a progressive. He said, well, we are progressive forward thinking, not in the restrictive kind of fascistic thinking that we have now. And it is very regressive. You know, saying to somebody that you are a bigot, you are hateful, you are disgusting, you must be silenced. Nobody should hear your opinion because you are practically evil. That isn't progressive. It's regressive. It's what used to happen a long time ago. And sadly for those on the left today, on the real left, as Stuart pointed out in the conversation, it used to be that the left, the old left, were tolerant of any idea or any ideology and were happy to roll their sleeves up and have a good old debate with whatever. And it was elements of the right way back when that were more censorious, right? They wanted to shut things down. Now it's the hijackers of the left, these cultural Marxist progressives, who want to obliterate from vision, from your auric field, from your field of hearing, that which they have deemed to be dangerous or offensive. You know, there's one guy, I'm not going to name him, he's a fucking idiot, excuse my language. Why are you excusing your language now, Richie? After all this time, that's a good question as well. But there's some Zionist clown who follows me around on Twitter. I find him amusing. And he's based up here in Manchester. He's a Zionist idiot, you know. And I read what he says when he contacts me because it's very educational for me to see the level that these people have been reduced to. These people are now coming after people in 2018 for things that people were applauded for doing in the 1980s and in the 1990s. So in the 1980s and 1990s, talk programs, television talk programs, evening talk programs, daytime talk programs. Think of the American ones. Think of Ricky Lake. Think of Sally Jesse Raphael. Think of Oprah, right? We didn't have so many programs like that in the UK and in Ireland. Not too many. But if you look at the American ones anyway, so Oprah, Ricky Lake and so on, they would regularly invite people with ideologies that were deemed to be very extremist onto the programs, and they would have a big debate with them. You would often see Ku Klux Klan people on these programs, you know, and it wasn't Jeremy Kyle or Jerry Springer type car crash bullshit telly. It was good stuff. These people were allowed to say why they were members of the Grand Wizardry chapter or whatever the bloody hell, Ku Klux idiots. They would get their chance, and then they would be they would be absolutely annihilated through sound reasoning and debate. And that was tolerated back in the 80s and 90s. Now it's not tolerated. So I've interviewed people that have denied aspects of what happened in the Second World War. I've interviewed people who've said the Holocaust never happened. And I've argued with those people vociferously. I interviewed David Duke and had a back and forth with him and made him look pretty silly, let's be honest about it. And I interviewed a guy who was doing very well in the primaries in California who said the Jews have an evil gene, which is just fucking ludicrous, and made him look a little bit silly as well. And that's what you do. I don't set out to make people look silly, but the guy looks silly when confronted by, a little bit of sound reasoning. But what the fascists want to do now, these progressives, as they call them, is they want to call me a bigot. Not me, I'm not important, but people like me, just for sharing space with David Duke, or Duke wasn't, this is two years ago, or anybody else. Nick Collerstrom was on the programme recently talking about the Skripal thing, and there was a bit of outrage amongst the Zionist groups that I would entertain Nick Collerstrom because he said that nobody was gassed at Auschwitz. So because I'm speaking to Nick, if indeed Nick Collerstrom committed some crime by saying he doesn't believe the story of Auschwitz, it isn't a crime in this country, thank God, not yet anyway, regardless of whether you agree with Nick Collerstrom or disagree with him, and I disagree with him and have disagreed with him, but they want to make it so now that even given air time to these people, even on subjects that are far removed from things like Israel and the Second World War and all of that, by the very fact that I've given them space, well, now you're a bigot, now you're racist as well. That's not progressive, that's regressive. And it's dangerous if it goes unchallenged, Absolutely. Even if you had two plonkers sitting down on an internet show and they were agreeing about something, like whether it's the Holocaust or whatever, the idea that it should be shut down or it should be criminalised is absolutely, to me as an idea, it's absolutely redundant. Let these people speak. Don't drive them underground. Don't patronise them. Don't demonise them. Don't call them evil, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. Doesn't matter. Let them speak, and when people are wrong and when their ideas and their ideologies have no basis in reality or no basis in reason, this will be outed in robust debate. It will be transparent in robust debate that their ideology or their thinking isn't very sound. That's the way it used to be. I know some of you are laughing now I mentioned Ricky Lake and Sally Jesse Raphael. God be with the days. But they spoke to these people and didn't scream at them and call them names. They left these people hang themselves. I know that's hang themselves. Maybe not the best turn of phrase to use when we're talking about, you know, far-right racists like the Ku Klux Klan. Of course, it's not the best terminology to use. But let them basically dismantle their own argument through their lack of common sense, through their lack of education. But today you can't do that, you know. You're not supposed to do that. Certain subjects now are taboo. You can't do it. We're seeing people asking the questions about the transgender issues, like Stuart Waiton. We're seeing people ask these questions on social media, and they're having their social media pages either temporarily suspended or basically deleted. Although, to be honest with you, as time goes on, I have less and less sympathy for people when they complain about getting deleted by Twitter or Facebook. You know by now what they are, Twitter and Facebook. You know what it is. You know that even if you have 20,000 or 100,000 followers, your reach is very limited anyway. So don't bitch about being banned by Facebook or Twitter. It was always meant to be like that, I would argue. Anyway, that's about it for this programme. Penny got back to me to say, finally, we were not offered any other choice on the restorative justice thing, and it wasn't put to me as a choice at all. That was the only suggestion, said Penny. 27-year-old man assaulted her then 11-year-old boy 8 years ago. That sounds pretty off to me, Penny. It really does. It sounds like you were stitched up there. And if you did find out that the man in question knew people in the police service, it sounds like there was a stitch up there. Sorry to hear that. That's it for the programme. Back tomorrow, Thursday, where Tommy Sheridan will be amongst the guests. Thanks to Dr. Stuart Waiton. Fascinating conversation with him. Thanks for listening. The programme will be on podcast in about 20-25 minutes time. YouTube as well by around about 9 p.m. UK time tonight. Do share it where you can. Look after yourselves and one another. You and I will speak tomorrow at the usual time of 5 p.m. UK time on your Richie Allen Show. Do stay in touch with FabRadioInternational.com and TriggerWarning.tv for lots and lots of independent creation, independent content, which is absolutely brilliant, okay? See you tomorrow.